Enjoy this walk through Sasquatch Territory with a cup of coffee. Dan is my name. Let me get right to it because I don't want to waste your time. At 70 miles per hour, I witnessed a Sasquatch being struck by a semi-truck, and that is only the beginning of the story. What happened a while later was horrendous and extraordinary. No doubt I can scarcely trust it, despite the fact that there were two different observers who saw the entire thing met mir. And let me begin by introducing my friend Morgan. Morgan is his name, and he is not a woman. Since elementary school, we have been buddies and ride motorcycles together. Always, our motto was ride together, bite the dust together. We were young when we came up with that, so I guess we thought it sounded cool, but this late September evening on a highway ended up being eerily relevant. Idaho's mountains. That morning, we planned to go on a motorcycle trip after meeting at a Denny's. That weekend, all the way to Montana. Weather conditions was ideal for it, mid-60s, clear and bright. Just mists overhead were those wispy ones far as high as possible. The Grand Slam was on both of our lists. Exceptional with some espresso. Very much like our pigs, we wanted some fuel for the long ride in front of us. One of those big foot bumper stickers was on one of the trucks parked outside the window. You know, the ones you see all over. It said Bigfoot, undefeated find the stowaway champion or something comparable. Thus we got to discussing Yetis, and Morgan thought the subject was only a joke. I didn't believe in Bigfoot at the time because it didn't really have an opinion, however. The man next to us at the table was a firm believer who happened to be the person who possessed the truck with a guard sticker. His name was Rich. He owned more than a couple of stories to enlighten us concerning the monsters of the mountain, as he called him. Furthermore, he didn't appear to be a man to lie. He was probably in his late 60s and a little older than us, retired, and appeared to be in good health. Morgan continued to deny any of it. He rested back up against his seat with a frown and said, "When pigs fly while eating his bacon, I'll believe it." We had no idea that he had already kind of predicted the future. Before we took off, Rich asked us where we were going. I showed him the course we were taking up to Montana, and he said, "Well, fellas, on the off chance that conversing with me didn't persuade you, you could both be adherents when the outing's finished. Yes, Morgan, even you." He continued, "One of the most heavily populated areas is 4 hours north of us, populated Yeti regions in this piece of the U.S. And if I'm not mistaken, your route you directly through there." We really didn't have time, so I wasn't going to ask him where he got that information for additional tales. So I thanked him for letting me know, and we left. Morgan followed my point. Behind as we hit the open street close to early afternoon. There's not a lot to recount during the first 4.5 hours ride was picture awesome. There were hardly any other cars on the road, unexpectedly empty for a weekend. Only two old young men and their bicycles, seeing where the street guides them, and it did eventually lead us to the mountain pass Rich was referring to. Morgan had to pee around that time, too. Neither gas stations nor anything else for most likely more than an hour. So he concluded he would simply pull off the street and utilize the incredible outdoors. Unexpectedly, around 30 feet in front of where we pulled off, there was somewhat sign alongside the road. A Sasquatch walking Bigfoot Crossing sign appeared on it. Appeared as though a joke thing, and I triumphed ultimately from it. I brought up it to Morgan, and he said, "Perfect. Now we will know for sure whether or not those things are real. Since if they are, they certain as damnation won't allow me to stroll into their patio and take a piss." He continued on his way. Down and up the bar ditch, across the tall, dead grass, and into the forest after a few steps. From the street I could hear him yell, "Hello, enormous Dom, how you like this?" The man won't ever grow up past childhood, I'll tell you. Then he said, "Let's see if they talk back," as he turned around, "Rate my call to Bigfoot." Furthermore, he began making a few crazy wailing clamors that sounded more like a goat being butchered than a Yeti. He did this for about a moment, and afterward, convoluted also, took a gander at me and said, "See nothing. What did I inform you of? Every one of the a fantasy." Correct about the subsequent, he expressed that there was a vocalization way off in the backwoods. "That man, do you hear?" I pressed. "What's that? That faraway call to end?" He stated, "You're not going to fool me with that." Morgan was half hard of hearing. However, he'd never just let it out. Also, that is the reason he was unable to hear the call. I informed him I wasn't provoking him, but he refused to accept it. I had no idea at the time what caused the call. All I knew was that it was far away. Also, it was strong. I think it was probably quite a ways as the mountain that is next to us. Furthermore, that was somewhere around 4 miles. I listened in silence for additional calls, and all I could hear was dead quiet. It was becoming more and more real, orange hue as the sun dipped lower in the sky, and I reasoned that it was past time to give up and resume traveling. I was grateful that whatever settled on that decision was someplace in the woods far away. Much to my dismay, there was a major objective on both of our backs after that stop along the main road. Furthermore, in the event that we were savvy, we would have turned around and returned. I skimmed over the Yeti Crossing sign once more. Also, I didn't track down it as amusing this time. Then we hit the road once more. The temperature quickly started to drop about 3 miles to the north. It was bizarre. I even could see grass near the road is beginning to frost. A couple of miles back where we halted, it was still presumably in the low 60s. I assumed that the climb up the mountain was to blame. Over the course of those 3 miles, however, we were unable to ascend more than 100 feet. I was taken aback as I tried to make sense of it. To my right in the forest, I saw a runner, a figure resembling a humanoid moving at the same rate as I was. I glanced at the speedometer from below. I had to double-check what I was seeing because I was going over 40, and unmistakable. There were its arms each at a 90-degree point, turning this way and that as it ran. Posture entirely straight, its eyes fixed straight in front of it. It was moving so quickly that it almost appeared it was in the air. The trees and other still items moved past me suddenly while this animal remained indeed, even with me. In order to point it out to Morgan, I slowed down while I was moving. He came riding up to me and inquired, "What's the matter?" I pointed at the sprinter. The creature fell to the forest floor as I pointed at it, basically vanishing from view. Over the sound of the engine, Morgan yelled, "What?" I pointed again at the being lying level on the ground. We were about 100 feet away from it, and it appeared to be nothing more than a heap of rocks on the ground from where we were standing. If I hadn't seen it running, I wouldn't have had any idea that it was a living creature. I shouted, "It's right there, man! Look, that's its head, and there's its arm right there." "I think Rich really gave you the crazy disease, Danny," he told me. "Next time anyone says a word to us about Bigfoot in a Denny's, I think we ought to just walk out of there. Those folks love to hear themselves talk, don't they? Let's go, Dan, there ain't no Bigfoot monsters here." Now Morgan was talking to me like I was crazy, and I guess I couldn't blame him, but it hurt my feelings a bit. I knew what I saw. I kept my head turned over my shoulder as we got up to speed and the creature stayed behind. It was still lying on the ground, and I was thankful for that. I wanted to put as much ground between me and that thing as possible. Unfortunately, as I would soon find out, it was following us. About a mile up the road, I heard a loud snap and the sound of wood splitting, a big whoosh, then Morgan cursing in a collision. I looked over my shoulder and there's Morgan flying airborne towards the ditch at the side of the road, and right behind him was a full-sized tree fallen in the middle of the road. It landed just behind me and just in front of Morgan, and so there he was on the ground. He wasn't moving. I thought he was dead. I stopped and got off my motorcycle as quickly as I could, totally forgetting the dangers that lay beyond the tree line. I ran over to him and he was just looking up at the sky. "I saw it, man." "Saw what, buddy?" "Bigfoot, they're real." And then he closed his eyes. Seconds went by and I thought he passed until he opened his eyes abruptly. "Is she okay?" he asked. "She?" "My bike." I looked over and the hog was, let's just say, in need of some work. I didn't want to crush his spirit, so I said, "Yeah, she's just fine, buddy. Now we need to get out of here. We'll go back for your bike first thing tomorrow. It's going to be all right. Promise?" said Morgan. "Yeah, man, let's go." "All right," he said. And he got up like nothing happened. It was a miracle. Didn't even break a bone in that fall. I swear that man's got 9 lives. I guess he owes it to the fact that he's only 100-something pounds. Light as a feather. I stood there with my hand out in case he needed some help, and he shook his head and said, I can walk. I was so thankful he was alive. I forgot all about the fact that we were being stalked by Sasquatch, and all of a sudden Morgan points over towards my bike and I look over, and there are 2 of them, 2 Sasquatches walking up onto the road looking intently towards the motorcycle. They were both holding primitive stone weapons, a stick with sharpened pieces of obsidian fastened to it by something like twine. I think it must be the Sasquatch version of a machete. Both were well over 7 feet tall and incredibly muscular. They had wide noses with deep-set eyes that were much smaller than most people's eyes. Their foreheads were sloped back and their skulls were like cones. They wore primitive jewelry, and one of them even had a nose piercing with a fragment of bone sticking through his nose. And the other one had earrings that looked a lot like what we call gauges. The one with the pierced nose watched us closely as we stood back with our hands up to try and tell him we didn't want any trouble. Meanwhile, the other Sasquatch with the gauges looked at the motorcycle like he was trying to figure out how it worked. I thought I would break the silence and said, "That's a '93 Harley-Davidson Sportster. Do you like it?" The person with the nose piercing began to wave his machete at us shortly after I spoke, as well as yelling something in his native tongue. I took it as a warning to stop talking. We therefore waited hopelessly there, unsure of their intentions. It wasn't long before, however, find out. The leader, or what appeared to be him, got on the bike, followed by the another one came next. They pushed themselves up the road at a snail's pace with their feet. They plainly had no clue about how to work a cruiser. I was content just to see them go. The one with the nose ring circled back around and waved his machete at us one last time, laughing. The other hand must have found the throttle before he could even turn around. In addition, he moved so quickly that the passenger in this back ended up flat on his back while the other drove, recklessly driving up the mountain road, veering off course everywhere. And at this very moment in the distance, a semi-truck traveling at around 70 miles per hour appeared, heading directly the Sasquatch that was driving in the incorrect lane. The truck was going excessively quick to stay away. Also, the Sasquatch was getting faster, so he must have hit the gas again by accident. There was no way to keep away from the unavoidable. What's more, in no time, the epic-scale cataclysmic collision sent the Sasquatch into the air while the truck let completely go and flipped over on the bank of the street. I and Morgan both looked up. The 8-foot-tall giant flipped and turned like a porcelain ball as we opened our mouths. A whirling ballerina ball that soars above our heads. It seemed to be happening at a snail's pace. He yelled out in grief when, with a thud, gravity finally brought him back to the ground. I assumed that he had died when he stopped moving. In the event that there's whatever can kill a Yeti, it's a semi-truck traveling at 70 miles per hour. I anticipated that his companion would visit to assist him, similar to my approach to Morgan when he fell. However, the scumbag continued straight towards the truck and afterward ran once more into the woodland with a pig in his grasp. The truck, it turns out, was a horde truck, and when the trailer flipped over during the accident, it catapulted a few pigs onto the street. We decided that going to the truck to check on the driver was the right thing to do. Okay, additionally, that was the main haven even close to us, and we resembled passing on targets on the road. So we moved over to the opposite roadside and went to the taxi of the truck. I was able to open the passenger door, and it wasn't completely destroyed. Unfortunately, the individual driving the vehicle was stationary. He had his head pressed against the wheel of the car. He spread his arms to the side. I shook him around and he wouldn't move. In any case, he was all the while relaxing. They'd marked the spot on his head where he must have been knocked out by the impact with the steering wheel. Be that as it may, he was as yet alive. I was attempting to stand by the man up when Morgan called attention to the window and said, "Danny accompanied us." What's more, surprisingly, there were not one, not two, not three, yet likely over a dozen Sasquatches with bloodthirsty expressions emerged from the tree line in a straight line, towards the truck. "Entryways locked?" I inquired. "That's right. Certain great to realize we got a centimeter of glass," Morgan said sarcastically, "to protect us from these giant savages." The whole crowd moved straight at us and both of us thought it was over. Shockingly, they drifted off to the back of the truck and around to the side. Then I understood what they wanted. The swine. We could barely hear the pigs being eaten alive in the back, where there were still pigs, as the monsters grabbed however much they could consume. The three of us were there trapped in the truck's cab, hoping we wouldn't be dessert. Then suddenly, in the direction of the forest, something shot through the air. It was a pig. The Yeti should have opted to keep the remainder as leftovers, and he began to throw the hogs back several hundred feet into the timberland. We were under the impression that they were nearly finished and would eventually return to the forest. Tragically, it didn't resolve that way. After getting rid of all the hogs, the group of barbarous beasts returned to the truck's cab and began punching the doors, causing significant dents in them. Furthermore, one of them tossed a stone through the windshield, almost hitting Morgan directly in the skull. The driver finally awoke at that point, and when he realized what was, he went behind the seat, began looking through a box, and returned with a shotgun. He requested that I lower the window as he discharged shots into the crowd. He nailed one right in the head, resulting in its demise, along with a few others that appeared to be wounded. He was pretty good. Shot, and the Yetis appeared to lose their force, until he ran out of shells at some point. He reviled as he searched for some more ammunition and don't track down anything. Consequently, Morgan spoke up and said, "Fellas, I'm the person who got us into this in any case. I let you know I would accept whenever hell freezes over also. I ain't recently seen flying pigs today." I saw a Sasquatch flying. So if I died today, you can inform the entire world that I died a Christian." He removed his shirt, opened the entryway, and ran out of the truck, yelling and making the same Bigfoot impressions he had earlier. "Ugly slobs, here's your dessert." He didn't make it in excess of 20 feet before the gathering of them were on top of him, and when they got him, they hauled him back into the timberland carefully hidden. In the meantime, I discovered that the truck driver by the name of Steve was calling for assistance on a mobile phone. This was the 1990s, and very few people at the time had cell phones. So I was shocked to see that he had one, and surprisingly more shocked that there was administration on that mountain. His explanation to the operator, they explained, "Wait a minute," and transferred him to another individual. Furthermore, this other individual appeared to have a deep understanding of the circumstance before Steve even told him. He was aware of the path we were traveling and even the precise mile marker. At last, Steve gave me the phone so I could give more information. The man inquired if this was a carjacking. "Motorcycle." I said, "Might you at any point depict the ruffians?" Indeed, 2 guys around 7 feet tall, various piercings, and there were approximately 14 others that were similar. I said 14, he asked, "Yes." I heard him speak something that was hard to hear when he stopped for a moment. He said at the end of the call, "Within 10 minutes we'll be there," and hang up. We were basically out in the center of no place. I had no idea how anyone could make it there in 10 minutes, but they did it in 9. However, these weren't cop vehicles. All of them were black SUVs with no markings and no lights. The vehicle in front went straight for the half-dead Sasquatch, who was still lying on the road. As though his day wasn't turning sour enough, previously continued to run over him, and I surmised they weren't. They were content because they backed up the car and ran over the animal once more, and again, until he no longer showed any signs of life. The body of the Sasquatch was thrown into the back of that CV and drove off, completely disregarding us as they waved at us. It had neither rhyme nor reason. They cared very little about aiding us at all, taking the Yeti body and driving off with it. I realized I would have to handle things on my own. I didn't, going to quit until I discovered whether Morgan, my buddy, was dead or alive. At the very least, he deserved a dignified burial. Consequently, when I disclosed my plans to Steve, he advised me to seriously reconsider my decision. I was set on it, however, and he understood he was unable to persuade me in any case. He wished me karma and returned to his truck to attempt to call for help once more. I went straight into the forest from where the creatures had taken Morgan by walking down and up the bar ditch. Furthermore, it didn't take me long to track down their tracks. They proceeded almost in a straight line that runs parallel to the road. The only response I received when I mentioned Morgan was silence. I was having to hunch over the ground because it was nearly dusk and there was little visibility. Hound dog to prevent me from wandering off course. Ultimately, they prompted a lofty precipice and halted. Additionally, there was dirt-written writing at the cliff's base. I read it and it said, "Try not to follow, currently gone." MJ has already left, so don't follow, as Morgan's initials are next to it. I did not comprehend what it meant. I required another once-over at the composition, and it was most certainly Morgan's penmanship. Consequently, I had no idea what to do. I was unable to go any farther with that bluff before me. Additionally, there were no tracks or signs of life anywhere near the cliff. Until my common sense told me to go back, I just paced around like a lost dog. I had a spouse back at home and a canine. However, I could always be unable to disregard my amigo. Despite the fact that he told me don't follow, I suppose he just wanted the best for me. For me, an acorn hit my head just as I was about to turn around. Then I looked around again. Up. It was Morgan. He was inclining down at the edge of the precipice, checking out at me with a major smile on his face, waving and smiling. "Hey buddy, how are you doing? Isn't it true, man, that you have 9 lives?" He didn't answer me recently, continued to grin. Okay, he's half hard of hearing, I recalled, yet he's not that deaf. I was just perhaps 60 feet underneath him. I questioned Morgan. He got up and started walking along the cliff's edge. By then, I could see a sort behind him with its hand out, as was it directing Morgan's movements with the likeness of a puppet. I made a stride back so I could see a greater amount of the scene, and as it turned out, it was one of those things that seemed to control Morgan wherever he went. He walked back and forth at the cliff's edge in a rigid and robotic manner. Finally, he gave me one final wave before turning around and standing on his heel like a soldier before standing rigidly, strolling once more into the timberland while the shadow of the animal followed him. I knew there was a problem, and because I was desperate to save him, I began attempting to scale the rock cliff. Failing miserably at each step, barely any feet I acquired, I fell down. I was too fat, I was unable to make it happen. Morgan was a distant memory in numerous ways, and I was forced to return with my head lowered. I saw red and blue lights near the truck flashing as I got closer to the forest's end. I immediately informed them that my buddy was in trouble after Steve was successful in obtaining actual assistance for us, someplace in the forest taken prisoner by those animals. They gave me a confused glance, but eventually started cautiously using their flashlights to search the forest. I drove them to the area I last saw him, and when they looked into the precarious bluff, they conversed with one another for a couple minutes before announcing that the search would need to be resumed tomorrow. However much I attempted, I proved unable. I was pretty enraged, trying to persuade them to keep looking. They promised me that they would have. The search team would dispatch early the following morning and keep me informed. I really didn't have much more to say. Could do at that point, so I followed them back to the road and was driven back to my home by them. Every day I called to see if they had found him. Nothing changes, the same story each time. This continued for a year before I gave up and decided he was no longer with me. I turned out to be genuinely discouraged after that everything, and it wasn't easy. But I was able to get rich, and that man helped me to keep your composure throughout everything, Steve. We would all meet at the same location. Denny visits from time to talk about the people she meets. If not for those men of honor, I could not be here today. A year later, on September 23rd, the same day the tragedy occurred, I was going through some espresso while perusing the news when I heard a thump at my entryway. When she opened it, my wife, she said, "Dan, somebody's here to see you." Slowly, I got up, went to the door, and looked down. And Morgan, my buddy, was standing in front of me. He seemed surprised when I went up to give him a hug and inquired, "What's all this about, Danny?" "I just came to deliver some additional deer meat that we needed to clear from our previous year's freezer. Man, it amazes me that you are still alive." "What did I say?" "That's what I ain't old," you answered. "How could you endure living with Bigfoot throughout the previous 2 years?" "Do you mean my spouse?" "Well, it ain't simple. I came to the realization more and more as we talked that he had no recollection of anything that took place. I carried him to Denny's with Steve and Rich, and despite the fact that Steve was correct, even after I told him what had happened, he still didn't believe it. And in fact, even though he didn't recognize Steve, he did remember Rich, and he thought that Rich was the whole thing. His concept to persuade him to believe Rich, "Perhaps you don't attempt to compel your opinion about Bigfoot onto the rest of the population," Morgan expressed, "on the grounds that with respect to me, I'll accept whenever hell freezes over." Well, that was quite an experience. "Buck, what do you think, genuine or counterfeit?" "I don't trust it when he flies.